Okay, final of these questions, question 8. First bit, write down the probability of R successes in N trials. That was just write down the formula for the binomial distribution. So just write down the formula. It's given to you in the formula book, but get a mark anyway. It's a nice easy mark. My guess is that this came from an exam so long ago they didn't give you the formula. So there was basically a mark for remembering it. But here, you're given that in the formula book anyway. Then we've got, well, I've written down here the probability of each event. A winning, B winning and a draw. We've got now 4 games, so I've got N is 4. And part A, I want the probability X wins none of them. So I've got here binomial 4 2/5. 4 games, probably A winning is 2/5. And I want A winning none of them. Stick those things into the formula and you get an answer out 0.0296. I'm going to give 3 marks for that. The next part was he wins more than 2 of them. More than 2 is 3 or 4. So I worked out the probability of 3, the probability of 4, added them together. Let's give you 3 marks for that. That's 0.1792. Right, part C was a little bit trickier. Before I go to part C, just backtracking here, we knew the probabilities earlier on. A winning was 2/5. B winning and drawing were equally likely. And in the final part of the question, you're told that A has won 2 games and you've got 2 other games which A has not won. So what we're looking at now is A has won exactly 2, which means there are 2 other matches left. The options for those other 2 matches are A wins 2 of them and there are no draws, or A wins 1 of them and there's 1 draw, or A wins none of them and there are 2 draws. And you've got to come up with the probability distribution for how many B wins. Well, B can either win 0 or 1 or 2, and you now need to know the probability to go with each of them. From earlier on in the question, you know that B winning and B drawing are equally likely. So I said here, if A cannot or has not won these games, then there's an equal probability of B winning or B drawing. Earlier on in the question, they were both 3/10. But now, because they're the only 2 possibilities, A cannot win these 2 games, we're told that. A has not won these 2 games. They're still equally likely, so each of those now has a probability of a half. Remember, these probabilities have got to add up to 1. So you couldn't say one was 3/10, the other was 3/10, and the other was 0. They've got to add up to 1. And they're still equally likely, but now we know A winning is 0. If the other 2 options are going to be equally likely, they've got to be a half. And that is given that A hasn't won any of those games. So now you need to go back to these 3 options up here and work out the probability of each option. B winning is going to be a half times a half, which is a quarter. That's B winning both of them. B winning 1 and drawing the other can either be win draw or draw win. That's a half times a half or a half times a half. That comes out to be a half. The other option is B wins none of them, which is drawing and drawing, which is a quarter, and that gives you, I've driven this table out sort of backwards with 2 at the beginning, but those are the values that can take 0 wins, 1 win or 2 wins with those probabilities. The key thing in that question, which was tricky, was to work out these probabilities here. That was nasty. Did anybody manage to get that right? You got up to the half. If you got the half bit, that's quite an achievement. That was the hardest bit there, working that out. Okay?
I did it with my that question.
You got the same answer? Yeah, did they sort of go about it the same way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but it was nasty. You had to make that sort of conceptual jump in the logic, otherwise you wouldn't have stood a chance in that question, unfortunately. I'm going to say that is worth 4 marks. Okay? So question 8. We had the first part of question 8 out of 1, then a 3 and a 3 and a 4, which makes that question out of 11.
What was the out of 0?
So we have 1 mark for writing the formula down at the very beginning. Then we had a 3 mark for part A, a 3 mark for part B, and a 4 mark for the last bit. So I reckon altogether now we've got first questions at 7, then 5, which makes 12, then 4, which makes 16, then 12, which makes 28, then 11, which makes 39 overall, mark out of 39 overall.